Hello friends, welcome back to Dungeon Design in Zelda. For this series we have already completed all 4 of the Divine Beasts, as well as the final trial with Monk Maz Koshia. In fact, we have only 1 dungeon left to complete in all of 3D Zelda, until May 12th that is. So before anybody asks, yes, we will be going back to the 2D games after this, but today's focus will be on Breath of the Wild's finale, Hyrule Castle itself. I'm very grateful to have Triforce Trends joining me today as we take a deep dive into level design.
Hey guys, hope you're all having a great day and I hope you enjoyed this video today. Make sure to check my channel out after this video because it's a great video, please watch.
Make sure to go check the link in the description so that you can head over to his channel once you're done watching here. But otherwise, let's hop right into it.
As far as story stuff to do before the dungeon goes, it's a mixed bag. It all really is up to you to determine how much of that you're going to do. We like to go do as much as possible outside of the castle, including the Divine Beasts and the DLC stuff, but you don't have to. This is a game in which nearly nothing is mandatory.
Well, nothing other than the Great Plateau. Once you've finished the tutorial there and gotten the paraglider, there is nothing stopping you from heading straight over to Hyrule Castle, except for maybe your own survival skills. You don't even have to approach from the main entrance. You could bomb impact launch your way over, or swim the moat, or blast in through the front gates. The choice really is yours. It is, in my view, worth doing all of this extra stuff first to get the most out of the game, but you absolutely don't have to. And some players like to challenge themselves and just dive right in. So anyways, the TLDR here is that aside from the plateau, there isn't a story quest or companion character to meet or anything like that. The only pre-dungeon stuff that you have to do here after the plateau is travel to the castle itself. That's just the nature of the game. So with that out of the way, for our final time in Breath of the Wild, let's head into the dungeon. Welcome back to Hyrule Castle, a location that we have visited many times throughout the series, but this is the biggest and most expansive version of the iconic castle to date. It is also in many ways a true realization of how Breath of the Wild's open air gameplay style could work in a dungeon, and it is great. This is in large part due to the enormous open air floor plan and non-linear progression style.
Essentially, the designers have given us a huge playground to run around in and do as much or as little as we want. Most of the dungeon is entirely optional or can be skipped in several ways, allowing the player to choose how much of the content here they want to engage with. Whether that be finding Koroks, oh, so many Koroks, loot treasure chests and resources, collecting weapons, or battling these swathes of enemies here.
Oh, did you say enemies? Because, yeah, there are tons of enemies, including guardians, moblins, Lizalfos, and even a couple of Lynels and boss enemies. My biggest complaint through and through when looking at the divine beasts is how few enemies there have been within the dungeons themselves. But here in the castle, we have the highest concentration of baddies around, which makes the castle feel like it's actually dangerous to explore, which is a good thing, by the way. Thankfully, there are lots of weapons to find, some of the best in the game in fact, so there won't be any shortage of equipment to use when taking on these monsters. Not just weapons either, there's a robust selection of materials to find here, enough to make a meal for just about every status effect or buff, allowing you to use food and elixirs to bolster your odds of survival, or just give yourself a bit of an edge in combat.
Now before we get ahead of ourselves though, let's pivot things and look at the architecture for a moment. Hyrule Castle is a pretty old building, made with pre-Calamity Hylian stone masonry, the same as you'd find at places like the Great Bridge of Hylia and the outer wall of the Great Plateau, all places with significance to the history of Hyrule.
At a glance, it may feel reminiscent of the Twilight Princess version of Hyrule Castle, but once you start looking at the finer details, that sense of similarity starts to fall apart pretty quickly. And I don't just say that because the castle is in such disrepair. This version of the castle feels a little more modest, less ornate than Twilight Princess's. That isn't to say that it has no ornamental features, it is the home of the royal family after all, and as you'd expect, the Hylian royal crest is plastered just about everywhere. But Twilight Princess's version of the castle had a lot of fancy ornamental gates, wall patterns, gold flourishes, and decorative panels. In general, it always felt to me that that game leaned more towards the Gothic style of architecture.
This version of the castle foregoes a lot of that for the more straightforward Romanesque medieval architectural type, with plenty of plain, exposed stone brick, which is actually quite a fitting look. It's ironic because this game is tens of thousands of years down the timeline after Twilight Princess, but it feels far less modern in comparison, but maybe this design choice was to more heavily contrast the technologically advanced, chicer architecture.
Regardless, the castle is a clean break from the final trial and divine beasts, which combined with the shrines gets pretty redundant feeling pretty fast, so a final dungeon that ditches all of that is a breath of fresh air. Well, mostly ditches, that is. There is actually still a shrine inside the castle itself, but that's more of a convenience for fast travel than anything else. In some senses, the castle feels like a counterpart to the Great Plateau, which was also an isolated playground. The plateau and castle in many ways both feel like condensed, heavily concentrated versions of the game map. The former being meant to stay engaging while easing new players into the game, the latter being meant to pose a challenge to players at the end of their journeys, whenever that may be. This is even backed up by the comparison to the Shrine of Resurrection and the Castle Sanctum made in the book Creating a Champion, which both feature the same coiling Sheikah technology and themes of revival, both being places where opposing forces, Link and Ganon, slumber and find themselves with a second lease on life, even if Ganon's way of doing it seems a lot nastier. Ugh.
There's plenty to discover here for the lore enthusiast as well, including two of Zelda's journals, as well as a journal belonging to the late King Rome. Regardless of which ones you're reading, they all manage to carry a sense of tragedy and pack a real emotional punch.
Okay, let's have a look at the music here. There are two distinct interior and exterior themes, which blend together and overlap depending on where you are in the castle. They are counterparts, two halves of the same piece, so they end up melding nicely while still retaining their own distinct identities.
The exterior theme is robust, grandiose, and in many ways just as triumphant as it is tragic. The layers of piano here, the brass, the whole orchestra is brilliant. Some sections of this track feel lifted right out of the main Zelda series theme as well, and it's never sounded better. This theme is a bombastic, climactic piece that is the perfect accompaniment to our assault on the castle and approach up towards the final battle. Integrated into this half of the theme is also some bars taken straight from Ganon's theme, which is suitable considering this is where the King of Evil has been holed up for the last century.
By contrast, the interior theme is more hopeless. It ditches the brass for an organ, and the percussion falls out almost entirely. Ganon's theme is still integrated into the piece here, but alongside it is Zelda's Lullaby, the piece we know and love that has long served as the theme for the titular Princess of Hyrule. These two themes at odds with each other perfectly represent the struggle that has taken place here for the last century, with Ganon and Zelda keeping each other at bay for 100 years straight. A couple of really great details is the inclusion of the low health indicator from A Link to the Past, thank you GameSpot, and the sprinkling in of a few chimes that make up a portion of the main Zelda series theme once again. It's barely audible over the rest of the instrumentation here, but it's great to hear it included.
Between these two themes, we have a pretty complex blend of emotions conveyed here. Ruin, desolation, hope, and triumph. Like the whole world is against you, but you just won't be stopped. It's musical perfection, and the choice to give us the two distant renditions of the theme is a perfect reflection of the open nature of this place.
It's not all open though. They strike a great balance in that regard. It's not like we're walking around a big empty field after all. It's more just open in the sense that we can determine where and how we explore the dungeon. That said, there are still several one-way paths blocked by malice with eyeballs, some of which can be circumvented with some clever climbing or use of Rivali's Gale, some of which cannot. There are long branching corridors, large rooms, and overall just lots of interconnectivity in the floor plan. So let's take a look at the progression structure here. Truly though, the best part of this dungeon is the amount of different paths and routes you can take through it. I don't think there's been a single playthrough of mine in which my progression through the castle has been the same.
If you want to head directly to the end goal, the Sanctum, you can take the outside path which winds up around the exterior of the castle, crossing through the two gatehouses and straight up to Ganon. Otherwise, you can bypass that and swim your way up instead, ascending the series of waterfalls using the Zora armor, or cheese all of that with Rivali's Gale, or you can explore inside and any combination or mix of these things.
Because of Breath of the Wild's open nature, they placed several entrances to the castle sprinkled around each side of the perimeter, so no matter which direction you're approaching from, you can find your way inside, whether it be through the east or west passages, the docks at the back of the castle, the front gates, some literal hole in the wall, or otherwise.
Unfortunately, some sections are really easily missed, such as the East Passage, which can only be entered from the outside via this one tunnel, whereas places like the Lockup, West Passage, the library and more all have multiple entrances and exits. I don't mind having a little bit of each, but it would be nice for this one entryway to not be so tucked out of the way and be easier to find. But considering it's an entirely optional section of the dungeon, that does feel pretty forgivable, let's be honest.
As mentioned before, there's a couple of overworld boss enemies here that could be seen as the dungeon mid-bosses. A Stone Talist hides in East Passage, a Stalnox serves as a test of strength in the Lockup, and two Lynels, one in each gatehouse, guard the main path up to the Sanctum. In terms of overall progression, I admit that I've struggled a bit with this script more than any of the previous 40 some odd dungeons that I've talked about in this series, simply due to just how open it is. There aren't any mandatory minor objectives to complete before the boss. There are no terminals to activate or keys you need to collect. Everything is optional. It's up to you to engage with what's here or simply ignore it. I personally like to go to the Lockup as early as possible, fight my way through the cells, take on that Stalnox, and get what could be seen as the dungeon item, the legendary Hylian shield, which is by far the best shield in the game. Ooh, and I even got a good one this time.
Even then, the Lockup can be approached from this rear entrance, entered through this hole in the wall. through West Passage, or by heading down this large vertical shaft into the adjoining hallway. There's no right or wrong way to go about it. There's also the armory, which has its own independent door, or you can head through the front gate and down these stairs. Zelda's room and study, meanwhile, have no interior path connecting to them, having all been sealed off by rubble, meaning that they have to be approached from outside. And look at that, there's almost a limitless amount of ways to do that thanks to the paraglider.
These same concepts apply to the library and dining room as well, which are all bursting with equipment and weapons and filled with enemies. So in terms of progression, it's hard for me to make a dedicated segment for this video because it's so wildly flexible. There is no one sequence of events or strict progression structure. However, that is the best part of it all. All of this stuff is worth exploring. It's challenging, fun, engaging, and rewarding to do. If dungeons are to appear in Tears of the Kingdom, then the castle here does set a precedent for how well the open-air gameplay style can absolutely work. One minor note is the difficulty balancing. As mentioned already, since you can choose to ignore most of the dungeon, and by extension most of the game itself, the developers had to find a way to incentivize you to actually explore. This is achieved in a couple of ways. One is the aforementioned materials and weapons scattered all throughout the castle. Since you're approaching the game's climax and the main route up to the sanctum is guarded heavily by guardians and tough enemies, placing the strongest weapons and gear around the castle means that you will want to explore to simply prepare yourself for the final stretch, especially if you chose to not do the divine beasts. But more on that in a moment.
And yes, even though those guardians are able to be bypassed, the game doesn't make it easy on you. So even if you can avoid fighting them, that doesn't mean you won't be in their crosshairs while making your approach to the sanctum. In short, it's hard to ignore these enemies when lasers are flying past you left and right.
Regardless of how much or how little you do, the end goal is the same. The castle sanctum at the very top of the structure. And when we step inside, we'll be confronted by the dungeon boss. In the sanctum here, there are two possible outcomes. If you've chosen not to complete the 4 divine beasts, you'll actually have to battle your way through a quick boss rush, taking on all 4 of the blights one after the other, or at least the blights of whichever divine beasts you haven't completed. So if you did 1 or 2, then the blights you missed will show up now. Taking on all 4 is actually pretty challenging, but beyond that, there isn't too much to say about the blights themselves that I haven't already covered in the other dungeon design videos for Breath of the Wild. So if you want to hear me rag on their boss design a bit, go check those out.
Otherwise, either once you've defeated them here, or if you've already beat them in the Divine Beast, then lasers will slice open this grotesque cocoon on the ceiling, and Calamity Ganon in all of his disgusting glory will drop out, break the floor, and take you to an area below ground. This arena is the Sheikah's Astral Observatory, and it shares some design parallels to the Sword Monk's Chamber in Trial of the Sword, but it's here that we'll get to face down against this monstrosity.
Calamity Ganon is, from both a visual and gameplay standpoint, effectively a combination of all 4 blights, and like some kind of horrible nightmare spider, and also this one boss fight from Resident Evil 4, which is just too nasty to show on screen. So we're back to the horribly spliced together Sheikah tech and Malice design. But credit where credit is due, this is the most horrifying and creepy rendition of this boss design yet. Maybe the scariest looking in the series. Well, until dehydrated zombie Ganon in Tears of the Kingdom maybe. He nasty, that's my point. Gameplay-wise, the same concept applies. He has Fire Blight's sword, shield, and fire attacks, Water Blight's spear, Wind Blight's cannon and tornadoes, and Thunder Blight's annoying ability to summon these metal pillars and call down electricity. He also has a knack for clinging to the walls out of reach to avoid being attacked directly. That said, he shares too all of the Blight's weaknesses, so if you've found an exploit for one of them, even if it's just parrying those laser shots, then you'll be able to apply that tactic here and break through his defenses just as easily. In fact, you can parry any of his attacks. Any of them. And the champion abilities will provide you even further of an edge up on him. Not to mention that the divine beasts will strike at the onset of the battle and reduce his health all the way down to halfway.
Don't worry about running short on equipment here either, since there's actually a handful of weapons, arrows, and shields scattered around the perimeter of the room. Essentially, despite the fact that they designed the hardest and most nightmarish field boss in the game, if you've prepared and done the bulk of the main story, then Link is so OP that poor Calamity Ganon just doesn't stand a chance.
Regardless, I do actually like this battle. It doesn't hit the same level of awesomeness that Monk Mask Koshia does, but I like that it combines elements that the previous fights have taught us, and brings it all to a climactic head here. I just wish it were a little more difficult, but I suppose that if it were more difficult, then those straight to Ganon runs would be even harder than they already are. So by adjusting the difficulty, you'd end up impacting one of those experiences negatively.
Once you've chipped his health away, he'll burst at the seams and explode. You'll be teleported outside to Hyrule Field, and the masses of his malice will attempt to form a new body, born out of his refusal to give up. Now we have the true final battle. Or I guess until the next game anyway. Dark Beast Ganon. True to his name, visually he takes on the more boar-like appearance that we've come to expect, but made entirely of malice. He's massive as well, making this quite the spectacle. The only issue is, this fight is a cakewalk.
It's all spectacle and no challenge. I guess after the heavy action of Hyrule Castle and Calamity Ganon himself, a bit of a reprieve that remains climactic in tone isn't uncalled for, but it does feel like a bit of a letdown. You get the very powerful bow of light from Zelda, and you just shoot the glowing parts from horseback, and then in a boss fight trope that I have expressed massive distaste for, you shoot the big eyeball.
I suppose it makes some amount of sense that this is so easy. With Tears of the Kingdom on the horizon, we now know that this isn't the true enemy, but a puppet of Ganondorf's, or so it seems at least. Still though, games should be taken on their own merits, not depend on the context of an upcoming sequel, and for a game as vast and as robust as this, we all anticipated a truly climactic fight. Instead we got light arrow roast ham target practice. Like, jeez, the Gerudo horseback archery range is actually harder than this.
Just a quick side note, even if the boss fight itself was a letdown, the music here is kind of incredible. The deep piano chords set this incredible tension, and then the game's main theme, which has actually been absent throughout our adventure, finally kicks in here in a brilliant and upbeat rendition. I love the clashing vibes here between Ganon's theme with its heavy piano and the boldness of the strings which clamber over each other. Despite this being Dark Beast Ganon, the music is oddly uplifting, like we've already won, which fits since this fight is so easy, you really can't lose.
There's also a second version of the song which kicks in after the halfway point of the fight. It's pretty similar, but the tempo is amped up and a choir and brass section subtly joins in, with the prevalence of Ganon themes reduced even further down, which sort of musically signals that we have the upper hand here.
A third piece starts right when we're about to deal the final blow, and I don't care for it as much, but it's there for that last moment of tension, and it gets the job done well enough, especially for how brief it is. With Ganon defeated, we get our ending cutscene, with the king and champion spirits finally able to rest. And Zelda somehow didn't age. Then the credits roll, and our adventure finally comes to a close. Beautiful. So that's the dungeon. Overall, despite the disappointment of a final boss, Hyrule Castle is a standout final dungeon. It has just the right tone, the right build-up, and feels like the best and truest realization of how a non-linear open-air dungeon can play out.
This is truly a great example for the sequel to follow, and when compared to the 4 Divine Beasts and the final trial, this is leagues ahead of those dungeons. While its progression structure, or rather lack thereof, is harder to nail down, the sheer concentration of challenge coupled with its limitless flexibility is exactly what makes this such a great dungeon. Compare this to the final trial in particular, which was way smaller and essentially a handful of segmented linear areas. This, by contrast, feels like a far more developed and satisfying conclusion to the game.
There's tons of secrets and collectibles to find, loads of weapons and equipment to nab, and swaths of enemies to battle, so my fellow completionists will find plenty of engaging things to do here. For those not as keen on being so thorough, that's okay too, because you don't have to do any of that. You can choose just how much to interact with while making your way to the finale. Options, my friends. Options are always good, and this sort of flexible progression means that no matter your playstyle, you'll find something to love here. And while I do have some nitpicks, like East Passage being tucked a little too out of the way, or Dark Beast Ganon being a bit of a pushover, those end up feeling like such small issues compared to all of the great stuff going on here. This is a great depiction of one of this series' most iconic locations, and a worthy finale to my favorite game. Well friends, this is the end of dungeon design in Breath of the Wild. I hope you've enjoyed this 6-part series, and I sincerely hope I've done this game justice. Dungeon design in Zelda is not over yet though. We've now completed Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, and Skyward Sword. So this caps off the entirety of the current 3D catalog. I can't wait to dive into the dungeons of Tears of the Kingdom. But in the meantime, as per many people's requests, yes, the 2D games are next. So make sure to join me next time when we'll be tearing apart the dungeons of Zelda 1 on the NES. I also want to thank my special guest Triforce Trends for joining me on this video.
I hope you all enjoyed. It was really nice to be here. I love you. I love you, Captain Bergeson. I hope I can be here again, and thank you all for watching.
It's been great, dude. Be sure to check the link in the description so that you can head over to his channel, where you'll find loads of great Zelda content. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I truly hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for watching this video. Before we end this off, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to my patrons and channel members, including, but not limited to, Greymage, Brenda, Tetra, Callie, Gail, Hylian Wes, Justin, Clifford Longhead, Midnight Naomi, and Bunny. Thank you all so much for the support and for watching, and I will catch you all next time. Bye-bye!